And you're back on the Barry Foster Show, coming to you from the beautiful Ridge Floor Studios in the city of Charm, Avon Park. Remind you, if you have any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions, you can drop me a line at thebarryfostershow@gmail.com. And we appreciate all you who've been subscribing and listening to these episodes. And I have the great pleasure of having my friend Ken Breslauer on, a great historian, and has done a lot for the 12 hours, but really, he got started. I think he got started with Florida roadside attractions. You have and I'm in front of me. I've got my copy of the Florida roadside attractions history, the complete guide to Florida tourist attractions before Disney. Is that where you got your start doing history in the Florida attractions?
Well, it really started when I was in graduate school, and I did my master's thesis on preservation strategies for historic roadside attractions. And not long after that, I think it was in 2003, Cypress Gardens closed rather suddenly. And all of a sudden, that became a really hot topic. I think people kind of took for granted some of these old attractions, that they'd grown up with. And all of a sudden, people were really concerned about, what was going to happen to a lot of other ones. So that kind of inspired me to write the book. So that came out in 2017. And it's kind of an encyclopedia of all the old attractions that were established before all the theme parks in Orlando.
How did you come up? It's listed alphabetically, and there's like more than 100 in here, I think. How did you ferret out some of these lesser known attractions that you list in the book?
Well, yeah, there's been so many uh, small attractions that kind of disappear after a few years. I had to come up with some criteria. So basically, I try to stick with the more well-known attractions that are featured in the book. However, in the back, there's a little index with all these other little mom and pop attractions. Some of them are really obscure, like Guinea Pig World, for example. There's some really crazy little attractions over the years. But I just tried to pare it down a little bit to maybe the 100 biggest. And of course, everybody knows the Cypress Gardens and the Silver Springs and Marine Land and things like that. So, it was a lot of fun, going through the material I had and kind of narrowing it down.
Well, when we were doing, I have a blog, Florida Fun Travel, and in our travels around, we found a place. I think it's Orange City officially is what it's called, and it's called Bongo Land, and it's these concrete dinosaurs. Is that one of the original attractions in Florida?
Yeah, Bongo Land opened in the late 40s. It was actually owned by the guy who also owned an attraction in that area called Sea Zoo, which was a marine attraction on US 1 in Port Orange. And Bongo Land operated for, 5 or 6 years. And part of the attraction was he built all these dinosaur statues. And it was kind of a, small amusement park, if you will. But it's just another one of those pretty obscure attractions.
Yeah, did these pop up along the major highways going down to Florida, trying to lure tourists off to the side by see the Seminole Indian wrestle the alligator, see a live bear in captivity, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and in fact, that's what you just mentioned is really one of the most important aspects of the roadside attraction history is the highways. The US 27s and the US 1 and US 19. Those roads were the main arteries to Florida in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Then came the interstate highways and the Florida Turnpike, and that totally changed everything. People stopped using these secondary roads and started using the interstates. And then you saw all these little attractions that sprung up along these roads just slowly disappearing. So that is really a big part of Florida tourism history is the evolution of the highways in the state.
Yeah, I remember when I was a young kid, we went to Florida. I lived up in near Cleveland, and it was 3 days and 2 nights of driving, which my dad did all of the driving. And we ended up in the place. One of the places we went was Marine Land, but I don't think that is actually still in existence, is it?
Well, it is actually it has been bought and sold many times. It was actually acquired by the Georgia Aquarium for many years, and then they just sold it to a entity out of Mexico. It's changed its name to Marineland Dolphin Adventure, and about 3 weeks ago, they declared bankruptcy. So I don't know how long you're going to see them in operation. It opened in 1938. It's been there a long time, and it's been changed drastically over the years, but it's still there.
Is that right? Well, one of the ways they've moved is to change some of these old attractions, the pre-Disney attractions, into state parks or government-owned facilities. I think both Weeki Wachee and Silver Springs are now state parks of some description.
Exactly. And so is Homosassa Springs, Ponce de Leon Springs, the several of them that have been purchased by the state. And of course, the granddaddy of all is Silver Springs, which closed in 2013 as a private attraction and became Silver Springs State Park. So a lot of these old attractions have been preserved, thankfully, by the state. Now, some of them have also been preserved by local municipalities. Sunken Gardens in St. Petersburg was acquired by the city after a vote. The citizens voted and they agreed to pay the price to acquire it. And now it's just a fabulous park in St. Petersburg. Um, Everglades Wonder Gardens in Bonita Springs is now a nonprofit, just called the Wonder Gardens. Caribbean Gardens in Naples is essentially now a municipal attraction. It's now the Naples Zoo. So you do see a trend of a lot of these attractions being taken over by government entities to preserve them. I mean, that's really the reality. The alternative is most of these would have been developed for housing or whatever. So it's really a good thing.
We went to Weeki Wachee, and I have to admit, it was a long time since we had been to Weeki Wachee, but it seemed like they really had kind of preserved the park without the concessions necessarily, but they'd preserved the park and the mermaid show kind of the way it was that I remembered when I was a very young child.
Exactly. Yeah, the Wikiwachi, the mermaid show, the mermaid theater has been preserved. The mermaids are actually now employees of the state of Florida, so Florida actually employs mermaids, and it's really a good thing that they say the attraction. Now it isn't nearly as big as it used to be. There used to be a lot of other side attractions. They had restaurants. They had a Birds of Prey show and a lot of other side attractions that are gone. Same at Silver Springs. But still, thankfully, they've been preserved. Silver Springs, of course, still has the glass bottom boats, which is the trademark of that attraction. Another example, Barry, is Parrot Jungle down in Miami. That attraction moved to the Causeway in Miami and is now called Jungle Island, but the original site is preserved exactly as it was when it was Parrot Jungle, and it was acquired by the town of Pinecrest, which is like a suburb of Miami, south of Miami, and it's now called Pinecrest Gardens. And if you go down to Miami, it is absolutely a beautiful park. I mean, it is exactly as Parrot Jungle was back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's just beautifully preserved. So you do see a trend of a lot of these, becoming government owned and operated, but it's thankfully that's happened because it's hard to preserve these large tracts of land.
Yeah, and I think Gatorland now has become the latest one. It's now Gatorland and the Alligator Preserve, I think is the title that they're using. But they're the latest one to go that route to keep the doors open.
Well, Gatorland in Orlando is a very successful attraction, and one of the old school ones. It's like the St. Augustine Alligator Farm. It's probably the oldest attraction in Florida. It dates back to 1893, and it's a great attraction. Sarasota Jungle Gardens is another old school attraction still going on. So there's still a few of the original old attractions left.
We were down in Vero Beach, and we went to McKee Botanical Gardens, and it wasn't until I was going leafing through your book that I found out that the McKee Botanical Gardens at one time was McKee Jungle Land, and it was actually a tourist attraction.
Right. Yeah. But that was opened in the 30s by Arthur McKee, and it operated for many years. It closed in 1976, and a big chunk of that beautiful garden was acquired by a condo developer and destroyed. But thankfully, a nonprofit was formed and reacquired 18 acres of the original attraction. And it's been restored over the last 25, 30 years, and it's really beautiful. They've done a great job. So the nonprofit preservation organizations came to the rescue there, thankfully, and preserved that.
Well, since you published your book and this information has now become more or less available, has there been any kind of movement or interest in people going to some of these attractions that were open in the 30s, 40s, and 50s that have maybe gone through some changes but still are open to the public? Do you find people who are don't necessarily want to go to the large theme parks and kind of want to see old Florida as it's being preserved?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's a large number of people that just don't want to go to these theme parks, and I'm not saying anything negative about them in any way. They certainly have their place, but they really have nothing to do with Florida's natural beauty. Most of these attractions were centered around aspects of natural Florida, whether they were springs or gardens or whatever. So there is a movement for people to really appreciate these older attractions. And I think that, the trend certainly is nostalgic to some extent, but a lot of people just want a more natural experience.
Well, yeah, I think that there are people who are my age who came to Florida as a young child remember some of these things. I remember seeing the ski boats at Cypress Gardens. I remember seeing the glass bottom boats at Silver Springs, and you kind of want to go back and revisit it, and maybe even take your grandkids and say, I know that you would like to go see everything that's happening at Disney, but let me show you what attractions were like when I was your age. So it would seem to me that there would be some people who want to go back, as you point out, at least for a nostalgic point of view.
Absolutely, it's a good point because if you look, what was the biggest attractions in Florida in 1970, and that would have been Cypress Gardens and Silver Springs because Disney opened in 71. Well, Cypress Gardens is out of business now. The site is now Legoland, and Silver Springs is essentially out of business. It's now a state park. So I think that just in 50 years, it's just the amount of change has just been incredible. If you told somebody, back in the 60s that Silver Springs and Cypress Gardens wouldn't even exist, in another 40, 50 years, they'd laugh. But it just shows you how quickly things change.
You would think I would know this, living as close as I do, but I was under the impression that if you went to Legoland, that you could buy a ticket or have a facility where you could go and see. I think they still have the ski show going on there. You can walk through what I think they call the old section, which is the Cypress Gardens section, and experience that without having to deal with all the newer the Legoland
You're you're
aspects.
you're you're absolutely correct. The Cypress Gardens site has been preserved. That was part of the deal and the historic easement for Legoland, so that's all been preserved. Unfortunately, the ski show was discontinued a couple months ago, so that is now gone. So that's kind of a sad element of Florida tourism that is no longer there. But the gardens are still there. So if you go to Legoland, you can see the old Esther Williams swimming pool and all the original gardens and where the ski show was. But it's certainly not like it used to be.
Yeah, I can remember when I moved to Florida in the 1980s. They continued to talk about how it was the longest continually operating ski show, and even one year during one of the hurricanes that came through, they had a towboat tow a skier around the ski show circle one time, and that was the show. So they could say that they had the longest continually operating ski shows. I didn't know that they discontinued it.
Yeah, they just announced that a couple months ago. So unfortunately, that is gone. Maybe on special events they'll bring it back, but it's a part of Florida tourism that was so big. It's hard to explain to younger people just how big Cypress Gardens was. It was absolutely, the place for many years, and it's gone now.
One thing that's listed in your book that I didn't realize that Busch Gardens actually went up before Disney World. Is that right?
Yeah, Busch Gardens started way back in 1959. It was more or less a PR move by Anheuser-Busch to have a little, visitors area at their brewery. And they had a garden there, and it just expanded and expanded. It was free to the public for many years. And then they decided to get into the theme park business, and then they just really expanded it. I think they opened a couple others in Virginia and California. But Busch Gardens, the breweries closed back in the mid 90s. The breweries are gone. They demolished those. They've been long gone. And so now it's just a pure theme park. Of course, Anheuser-Busch sold it many years ago. But yeah, it started way before Disney.
Yeah, you mentioned that some of these sprung up because of the natural flora and fauna, whether it's the springs or a great growing area, jungle growing area. But were there many parks that sprung up because they were part of the of another business venture like Busch Gardens that was already existing there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could give you an example that maybe is sort of like that. In 1955, a entrepreneur decided to open up a direct competition to Cypress Gardens called Sunshine Springs in Sarasota, and he just basically copied everything Cypress Gardens did on this man-made lake in Sarasota, and so it was sort of a contrived thing. It wasn't like the natural lakes and the cypress trees and all the beautiful gardens and so forth. He started it from scratch, and it didn't fly, and it was one of the biggest failures in attraction history. So it doesn't always work out that well.
Speaking of contrived, we were traveling and we stayed at a place and there was a huge housing development which I did not realize at one time had been a place called Florida Land, and Florida Land was just this like a pizza cut up of every different attraction in Florida, trying to give you a little bit of Six Gun Territory, and a little bit of Disney, and a little bit of Cypress Garden. So you only had to go to Florida Land to visit all the other attractions.
Exactly. Yeah, they that was in Venice, Florida. Another bad idea, actually. They had like a porpoise show, a Seminole Indian village, they had gardens, they had a water show. They had all kinds of things. It was really, as you said, they tried to take an element of every successful attraction and put it in one place. But it was a pretty big failure. It operated from 1964 to 1971, but in between those years, it closed several times. They had all kinds of problems. There's another example, Barry Marco Polo Park opened in 1970, right off I-95, just north of Daytona. And their idea was, well, all these people are going to be coming down to Disney World, which was opening in 1971. So we're going to siphon off some of that. And they opened up this massive amusement park with kind of an international travel theme. And that thing was just an absolute disaster. It just lost a fortune. It only lasted a few years. So there have been some bad ideas in the world of Florida tourism, but the true attractions that are centered around Florida's natural beauty, most of them have survived in one form or another.
Now, are there any post Disney theme parks that have sprung up, as you say, to kind of people are going to be coming to this area anyway? Let's see if we can get a few extra tourist dollars. Have there been any post Disney parks that are now in existence?
Well, there were several in the Orlando area, alligator attractions. There's one in Plant City, Kissimmee, and so forth. A lot of people tried to kind of capitalize on that, with Disney coming. I don't know if you remember Ross Allen, the famous reptile guy at Silver Springs. He opened an attraction called Alligator Town, USA in Lake City on I-75, and right after Disney opened, but he died unfortunately right after he opened it. But it was just another, attempt to capitalize on people coming down to Florida on the interstate. But you know, the Disney theme park, you know, the Universal Studios and SeaWorld, you know, they have such, you know, strong financial resources. It's really hard to compete with those, and that's really kind of spelled the end of the line for a lot of these smaller attractions.
Well, so now tell me, I have a copy of the original Florida roadside attractions history. Tell me about the new version that you've got coming out.
You have a revised edition coming out hopefully before the end of the year, and it's going to update a lot of things that are in the book, a lot of little minor details, but we've added a few attractions that we found. And in the index in the back of the smaller attractions, we found a whole bunch of interesting little attractions that have, you know, long been forgotten. We got a lot of new photos, you know, one of a kind pieces of memorabilia and so forth. So it's going to be a nice little update to the original book. And like I said, that should be out probably by the end of the year.
Yeah, you mentioned this, and I got to tell you, one of the great things about this book is the plethora of pictures that you have, and especially pictures of some of these really obscure places. How did you come by this stuff?
Well, all I can say, Barry, is thank God for eBay because there's nothing you can't find on eBay. You know, what I find very interesting is you see, I guess, people maybe our age or a little younger selling their parents travel slides and scrapbooks and things. You know, they probably think, well, I don't want that, you know. Or they find them at a flea market or a garage sale, whatever. It's kind of sad because you see these fabulous, you know, collections of color slides and photographs of people on vacation in Florida, and it's just a wealth of information and unique photos and so forth. So I've gotten a large majority of that on eBay. I've also, over the last 20 years, been collecting the Florida home movies, and I'm gonna start posting those on YouTube in a few months. And it's just some spectacular footage of just really obscure attractions, and it's just a really fun thing to look at.
In your poking about, have you found anything that caused your eyes to get wide? Like I didn't even know that existed.
Well, you know, I really like the more obscure attractions, and when you do research, you find photos or home movies, and you find an attraction or you know a sign that's you know leading to an attraction or an entrance, and you go, where is that? And then you really got to do some digging, and you come across these attractions that you didn't even know existed. They were so obscure. You know, a lot of these, especially in the mid late 50s, early 60s, all these little attractions were popping up, and it's just so much fun when you run across them and do a little research. It's really you do a little detective work, but it's a lot of fun.
So now, is the original book Florida Roadside Attraction History, is that still available, and how do people get that?
No, unfortunately, we are totally sold out. We sold out a couple years ago. You see them pop up on you know eBay or Amazon now and then, but unfortunately, those are all gone. I do have two other related books. I have a book on the history of Florida souvenir pennants and one on souvenir decals, and those are available on eBay. It's easy to find. Just you know, search for Florida decals or Florida pennants, and you'll see those books. But the roadside book, which is the main thing, the revised edition, like I said, will be out by the end of the year.
Okay, Ken, and when that comes out, I want you to come back on and we'll talk about this again. Okay, this is to me, it's a fascinating subject, and you've done an excellent job in getting all this stuff together. It's just an amazing thing. You could
Thank you,
start
Barry.
your own.
Appreciate it.
You could start your own roadside attraction of Florida roadside attraction history. We've been talking with Ken Breslauer, who's a great historian, both for the Florida roadside attractions and also for the 12 Hours of Sebring. And he's written a couple of books and a new one coming up. You've done the 1983 race, the Hitchhiker, and the War Horse, and
Correct. Yeah,
and
that's
and
a great story.
and now you've got one coming up for the 1990s. You've got a working title for that.
It's called Storms Over Sebring, the decade of the 1990s at Sebring.
Great stuff. Ken, I really appreciate your time on this, and we'll be looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Barry Foster Show. Again, if you have any ideas, thoughts, suggestions you want to pass along, it's the Barry Foster Show at gmail.com. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.